Turning over. Quiet, please.
Actor and writer on Doctor Who and Sherlock, Mark Gatiss, makes his living from his lifelong passion, storytelling.
My whole career is a long revenge against PE. If people know me for anything, I think children who are not necessarily sporty can take a little bit of heart.
Mark first walked onto our TV screens in the cult comedy The League of Gentlemen. Horror films have been an obsession since childhood.
I used to walk around the football pitch talking about horror films with my best friend.
Enjoy this performance, Wolf. It will be your last.
History has also always been one of my biggest passions, really, from primary school.
Very dark, really,
But funny
really
as well, I
catchy.
imagine.
It's a sort of affinity with it all, in a way. My mum used to say I had an old soul, which I always liked.
Mark's mother, Winnie, died in 2003.
The idea that my mother was half Irish, it has all kinds of romantic connotations. I'd love to join the dots right the way back. I'd like to be the King of Ireland, but if I am the King of Ireland, I won't be, I'll be quite gracious. The big mystical thing for me is my mother's side. The Irishness of her side of the family always appealed to me. I've never really delved very deeply, but the ideal place to start is with my dad, who still lives in the house where I was brought up.
Mark's on his way to see his dad, Maurice, in County Durham, in the northeast of England.
I think he's always been intrigued about my mother's side as much as his own. I'm really just fascinated to find out.
Mark's stopping in to pick up Maurice at his local pub.
Hello, fake.
So, Dad, what do you think we might discover in lurking in the shadows?
Murderer of some description.
That's what I said.
So I painted this picture 15 years ago when I was a lot younger. I didn't expect you to hang it up like that. That was when I was slightly obsessed with Velasquez. Everyone thinks it's me as a choir boy, which I certainly never was. So, Dad, tell me everything. Where'd,
Well,
oh, he's going to start.
I'm afraid it was the milkman.
Well, we'll start with these then. This is wedding day, isn't it?
Certainly is. With your mother.
That's 1957.
It is.
Where was that?
That's the front of Catholic Church at Dean Road.
Dean Road, right. But were you aware of Mum's family being a Catholic family? Because Mum was always a bit lax, wasn't she? Did you?
Well, she wasn't lapsed until she met me.
You say that to all the ladies.
And
So, what did you know of Mum's family? Did she tell you about the O'Kane sort of Irish side of the family?
not a lot. Not a lot.
But you knew that Hilda, Mum's mum, grandma, was a widow, and Jeremiah had been the local GP. Is that right?
I knew that.
Yeah.
But he was very well thought of.
So this is Jeremiah.
Mark's maternal grandfather, Jeremiah O'Kane, died the year Mark's mother was born, so they know little about him, except that he came from the north of Ireland and moved to England to practice as a GP.
I've always thought he looks a bit like Little Titch or Grimaldi the clown.
I can see the nose.
The nose, well, it's a fake. Did I tell you his nose has haunted me? Yeah. It's the OK nose. So we got this photo when Auntie Sheila died, and we've never seen this before. Yes. But he looks like he's certainly part of the team.
Yeah.
And whether it's actually maternity. It's like Call the Midwife, actually. Maybe that's what it is. Mum always used to say you should be a doctor. I said, why? What? And she said, you've got lovely hands. Yeah. But this is very prestigious, actually. Queen's University, Belfast.
Yeah.
Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery, and Bachelor of Obstetric. Oh, there we are. So that's it was maternity was his speciality. He's got 3 degrees. That's rather good.
Mm.
Wow. 11th of December, 1918. That's fascinating. So it looks like I need to head to Ireland, well, certainly to Northern Ireland, and probably to Belfast if we're going to find out a bit more about Mum's family.
His grandfather, Jeremiah O'Kane, is Mark's way-in to his Irish ancestry.
I became slightly obsessed with being a quarter Irish. It's quite a good thing to say. Not as good as half Irish, certainly not as good as Irish.
Mark's starting at Queen's University, Belfast, where Jeremiah completed his medical training in 1918. He hopes the university's archives will have records of his grandfather.
2 soups, please.
Absolutely.
Archivist Ursula Mitchell is helping Mark.
And this is the entrance one of the entrance registers for Queen's University Belfast. It's for the year 1912, 1913, so this is the year Jeremiah O'Kane came into Queen's. There he's there, Jeremiah O'Kane.
Dates of birth, religious denomination, Catholic. Parent of God and Margaret O'Kane. So he was from Derry then?
He was, yes.
To find out about earlier generations, Ursula has tracked down more family documents, including Jeremiah's birth certificate.
So, birth. This is in Garva. Father John O'Kane of Garva. Mother Margaret O'Kane, formerly Mullen. An obituary. Gosh. So this is his mother.
Yes.
Died in 1939. It was with sincere and very deep regret that her many friends learned of the death of Mrs. Margaret O'Kane, which occurred at her residence, the Commercial Hotel, Garva. A native of Glenullen, deceased was the daughter of the late Jeremiah O'Mullen, a large landowner in the district of Ashlamaduff. It just sounds like it's from the Middle East. Jeremiah O'Mullen would have been a big landowner, a big Catholic landowner. Land.
Yes.
As Lex Luthor always said.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially
people always need land.
Especially in Ireland.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing.
It's lovely.
From his mother, Winnie, whose maiden name was O'Kane, Mark has now traced back 3 generations. His great-grandparents, John and Margaret O'Kane, lived in County Londonderry. And Margaret's father, Mark's great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah O'Mullen, was a landowner.
Very intriguingly, my great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah O'Mullen, had obviously some connection to quite a lot of land. So I'm heading to the Public Records Office in Belfast to find out more about it.
Mark's meeting historian Bill McAfee, who's been searching for Jeremiah O'Mullen in Irish land valuation books.
I was surprised I was able to find Jeremiah because you wouldn't have had many Catholic landowners at this time.
You do have to leaf through the book
In fact, eventually you do come to a page in the 1880s where
Dennis Mullen, John Mullen.
there's a lot of Mullins.
But not, is that the same as O'Mullen, or is it?
Well, yes, it is.
Right. So here we have Jeremiah O'Mullen.
Mullen. And then it says...
That says...
It says same, which means it's Jeremiah.
Yeah.
And if we keep going, there he is again. So this is all Jeremiah.
So, right. So you're all, is it like a farm?
Oh, yeah, these are all farms, you see.
Yeah. He's the landlord.
Yeah. Yes, actually. A fairly substantial landowner.
The valuation books show that Jeremiah O'Mullen owned more than 700 acres in the 1880s. This made him one of the biggest Catholic landowners in the area.
Now, I have a surprise for you.
I'm glad. I love surprises.
Who do you think that is?
Oh, my Lord.
What's that, Louis?
Wow. Is that Jeremiah?
That's Jeremiah.
Oh, my.
Obviously, as a young man.
Yeah. And a looker. Look at that nose. It's been following me for centuries.
Now you know.
Wow, that's amazing.
Isn't it?
1860, 1850, something like that. It looks
Round
like
about that, yeah.
Cravat.
So that's him when he's a young man.
It's amazing.
There he is. As an older man. Same man, different time.
Some years later,
Yes.
he'd grown a considerable beard.
Oh, yes. That is a very good pony and trap. This is a quality horse.
Yeah.
This is a quality piece
Yes,
of
right. And
kit.
all the livery.
And all the livery's very good.
So they are aspirational people.
Oh, yes. They will drive down the road to the church on a Sunday and something like that.
Lord and Lady Muck.
Oh, yes. I suppose so.
And that's the wife.
That's Elizabeth.
Mrs. O'Mullen. Elizabeth O'Mullen. What do we know of her? Anything?
Well, she's Elizabeth O'Kane.
Is she now?
Oh, she is.
That's her maiden name.
That's her maiden name, yeah. She is an O'Kane.
Through several generations of his family, Mark can lay claim to both O'Kane and O'Mullen ancestry. Mark's great-great-grandmother Elizabeth's surname was O'Kane until she married Jeremiah O'Mullen. And their daughter, Mark's great-grandmother, born Margaret O'Mullen, married John O'Kane. Both surnames were extremely common.
There are so many Mullins and O'Kanes here that, in fact, you know, the chances are he'll marry
Yeah.
a Mullen or else.
Throw
He might even
throw a stone and you'll hit one.
Yeah, he might even have married a Mullen. Never mind that. There's so many of them.
Might have married himself.
And they wouldn't be necessarily related.
Yeah, not in a direct way.
No.
Brilliant.
So far, we haven't really shown you where in the country Jeremiah would live. We're in Belfast here. And the O'Mullens and the O'Kanes, of course, there are quite a lot of them live in this area of County Londonderry. And that area was once, where they live, was once known as O'Cachan's country.
Okay.
O'Cachan is the Irish for O'Kane.
It's mine.
It's yours.
I could have planted a flag on it. O'Cachan.
O'Cachan. That's the Irish. So you'll be...
King of Ireland.
I don't know if you can just be the High King of Ireland, but you might get part of the way up. Those particular genes came from there.
My realm. So Jeremiah O'Mullen is obviously quite an unusual man.
Yes, yes.
So we should go in pursuit of him.
Oh, yes. And find out a bit more about him.
Go west, young man.
In this case, you're going to have to go west and slightly northwest.
Go northwest, youngish man.
Yes, indeed, indeed. You are.
Brilliant. This is so exciting.
In the north of Ireland in the 1880s, it was unusual for a Catholic to own land. But Mark has confirmed that Jeremiah O'Mullen was not only a landowner, he owned hundreds of acres.
How he came by that, I don't know whether it was by inheritance or whatever. So I'm heading to County Londonderry to try and find out more about him.
Mark's come to the Guildhall in the city of Derry, in Londonderry, to meet historian Jonathan Barden.
Here he is. Oh, that's
Magnificent photograph, isn't it? Yes. He looks a bit like you.
I should hope so. Jeremiah O'Mullen, would he have inherited that land or from his own father?
Let's have a look at this survey carried out between 1848 and 1864.
There's that word again, Ashlamadaff.
And this is the main family holding in Ashlamadaff, which is right in the heart of the mountainous country.
George O'Mullen crossed out and replaced with Jeremiah.
We know that George O'Mullen was in fact Jeremiah's father.
The record shows that Jeremiah's father, Mark's great-great-great-grandfather, George O'Mullen, had occupied the family homestead at Ashlamadaff before his son. But unlike Jeremiah, George didn't own the land.
This is a tithe allotment book. I would say this document indicates that George, he's not a landowner at all. He's a tenant. It's poor arable land. It's a pretty small amount of land, so he's not particularly well off. Now, our next one is, it's a freehold lease.
To Mr. George Mullen, 1826. An indenture, and this is George O'Mullen, and he is leasing land in a place called Glack.
It's certainly a mystery when we find that Jeremiah is really a very substantial landowner.
Yeah.
But his father, George,
Was not.
clearly is not. How did that happen?
How did that happen? Are you telling me you don't know?
I don't know.
Oh, gosh. I was waiting for an answer. Well, yeah. So George doesn't have very much.
No.
And then Jeremiah has quite a lot.
George O'Mullen was a tenant on 2 plots of land in the 1820s, the family homestead at Ashlamadaff and farmland in nearby Glack. This land had been under British control for more than 200 years. It was in the province of Ulster, in the area which today is Northern Ireland. In the early 1600s, the English conquered the north of Ireland and seized Ulster from the native Irish chieftains. In 1609, King James I began what became known as the Plantation of Ulster to bring the unruly Catholic Irish under control.
He decided that he wanted to calm this place down by introducing good Protestant British. The most difficult place to attract British settlers to was O'Callaghan's country. It was the most Gaelic part of Ireland. It was heavily wooded, it had wolves, it had wood kern or bandits in those forests. And so James approached the livery companies of London and managed to persuade them to involve themselves in planting this particular area.
The livery companies had developed from London's ancient guilds, such as carpenters, grocers, and fishmongers. They were made up of wealthy merchants, traders, and craftsmen. King James instructed them to colonize this part of Ulster.
The rule was they had to remove all of the native Irish from their land. Only 10% of the land was left for the native Irish to keep.
It's sort of like it's like an Indian reservation, isn't it? or the Highland clearances. It's an ethnic cleansing that's going on.
The livery companies failed to entice British Protestants to territory they feared was hostile. By George O'Mullen's time in the 1820s, the London landlords had no option but to lease to Catholic tenants. George rented his plot in the townland of Glack from a livery company, the Worshipful Company of Fishmongers.
If we look at this contemporary description of Glack here, dated 1835,
there is not a single landholder at present in the townland of Glack of any other denomination than Roman Catholics. The reason assigned for this singular instance in the above parish is that the entire of Glack was formerly
moss
and mountain altogether. Oh, you've got it there. That's not fair. I was doing very well.
You were.
Formerly moss and mountain, altogether uninhabited, the Catholics were driven up to the mountains of Glac to colonize its cold and barren surface. That's fantastic. So where's Glac geographically?
Now, that map is about 50 years old. I got it in about 1965. But it does show the townland names, which is why I like to hold on to it.
Right. Glac.
Now, if we can find the foot of Lochermore Mountain, and you should be able to find Glac.
There's Glac.
There's Glac. Don't forget, it's mountainy land. It was
Pretty remote.
It was pretty remote.
Pretty wild.
Before the plantation of Ulster, the whole area would have been O'Cahan land. And Lord O'Cahan, in his territory, he lorded it over other Gaelic gentry beneath him. It would have been the O'Mullins.
Right. Yeah. So I'm gentry. Just say this. I'm an Irish Time Lord. That's all I need to know.
You are descended from an Irish Time Lord. You are a Time Lord, yes.
Or a lord at least.
Because those lords were, in earlier times, kings. So certainly the head of the O'Mullen clan, the head of the O'Cahan clan, would have been a king. At one stage in Ireland, in the early Christian times, there were about 200 kings in Ireland.
Too many.
Too many.
Let's narrow it down. Ancient Irish kings, that does the heart proud. I'm deeply aware there are lots of O'Kanes and O'Mullins around here. So I'd have to devise some sort of kind hearts and coronets type plan to knock off all my relatives in order to claim the kingship. But I did want a murderer in the family, so maybe it's going to be me. But the big mystery at the moment, or recent times, is Jeremiah O'Mullen's father, George O'Mullen, who is my great-great-great-grandfather, was paying rent on a piece of poor arable land. And then, as we've discovered, his son, Jeremiah, is then someone of considerable substance and land. So something has changed between father and son. So we're going to head to Glac now to see what we can find.
Historian Dr. Heather Laird is joining Mark. She's taking him onto the land that George rented.
So Mark, here we are. This is our stopping point.
Bleak, barren, cold Glac.
So Mark, I know you've been hearing a little bit about your ancestor George O'Mullen and how this area relates to him.
Glac.
Glac, yes. The townland of Glac.
The cold and barren.
Yes.
Yes. Looks rather nice today.
I also have discovered that George was married and his wife's name was Bridget O'Kane. And I think O'Kane is a name that's come up already for you. George and Bridget had 8 children, so a substantial family, substantial sized family. And of course, as you can see, the land, it's very beautiful today, but it's not exactly the most productive of land. So that might raise a question in terms of how George is sustaining his family and keeping his family. So what I've discovered is that George was not only leasing land from the Fishmongers' Company, he was also an employee of the Fishmongers' Company.
George's landlord, the Worshipful Company of Fishmongers, used much of their land in Glac for large-scale cattle grazing. This could put them in conflict with their local tenants, renting small farms from them on the higher, less fertile ground that was left over. These subsistence farmers believed it was their ancient right to move their own small herds down to better land when their grass supplies ran low. So the absentee landlords employed locals like George O'Mullen to protect their interests.
He was employed by the Fishmongers' Company as a land steward and as a herdsman. It's kind of like our modern-day equivalent of a farm manager. And one of his roles would have been to collect rent from those who were those who were renting the land from the Fishmongers' Company.
Tensions between the locals and their London landlords were running high when George O'Mullen worked as a land steward. Population increases through the 1820s and 30s made life more difficult for tenants. So they sometimes resorted to intimidation and violence against the middlemen.
I have a document here that actually gives us a sense of just how vulnerable somebody in George's position might be. It relates to an incident that took place in neighbouring Fermanagh.
In the newsletter of last Tuesday, we stated that the Reverend Mr. King of Corrod, County Fermanagh, had received a notice from Captain Rock commanding him to discharge his steward, otherwise they would both be destroyed. In accordance with this notice, the captain's men have commenced putting their threats into execution, as on the night of Tuesday the 10th inst, the house of Hewitt, the steward, was set on fire and consumed. The day after the burning, a notice was found informing Mr. King that this was the first visitation, and to remember that the second would be death, death, death. Captain Rock. God, this is fantastic. So who is Captain Rock?
Well, Captain Rock is not an individual as such. There isn't a centralised kind of agrarian organisation, but what there is a sort of persona. So any group of subsistence farmers who felt that their livelihoods were being impinged on could take on the persona of Captain Rock.
So it's a sort of invented name for a movement, for a gang.
Yes.
Captain
yes.
Rock.
If the warning wasn't heeded,
Yeah.
this could then escalate.
And did people die?
Yes, people died, property was damaged, people were attacked.
Oh.
And in fact, I have an example of a notice that could be received.
Take notice on pain of suffering the most excruciating torments of death. Any landlord or landlord's agents or underagents
Under peril.
on their perils
Yes.
are strictly forbidden to take, distrain or impound any tenant's goods or chattels, or any pound keeper taking any man's cattle into his custody will undergo the same fate as above mentioned. I remain yours truly, Captain Rock. Wow. Excruciating torments of death.
The language is often a mixture between kind of pseudo kind of legal language and also almost biblical.
It is,
kind
yes,
of
yeah.
Old Testament language.
It's got that, also the feel of the Jack the Ripper letters.
Yes. And I actually have a document which suggests that George's job did in fact lead him into a certain amount of danger. And this is a document that was sent on the 1st of August, 1827.
George O'Mullen, the superintending herdsman who resides at Glack, here we are, applied to the deputation to be assisted with money to enable him to build office houses, his former ones having been destroyed by some malicious mountaineers in revenge for his pounding their cattle when trespassing on the company's lands.
So what he's done is he's taken their cattle have been trespassing on, he's found them trespassing on the company's land. He's taken those cattle and he's taken them essentially into custody.
Right. George O'Mullen has a salary of £20 a year for receiving the rents of the mountain pasturage and taking care of the cattle depasturing thereon.
So
he'd lost his buildings to a revenge fire.
he did, and clearly it doesn't say they were burnt, but that's the most likely thing that happened
Yeah.
to those buildings was that they were burnt down.
But it is very. I'm torn because obviously your natural human sympathies are with the malicious mountaineers who are just literally struggling to exist up here, and my instincts would absolutely be against the company. So it's morally ambiguous, to say the least. But also feeling George had got a good job in a very difficult time.
He's in a difficult situation.
Between Captain Rock and a hard place.
I think exactly that.
And also, as he was almost certainly related to everybody on the mountain, it might have been very tall. Well, clearly the shadow of the plantation is immense. In George's time, it was an absolute fact of life. They were living with something from 2 centuries before, which had totally upended the natural order of things. So I'm intrigued to know whether George O'Mullen, who was in a very precarious situation in Glac, felt at all ostracized by his community and by the people who surrounded him.
Mark's in the heart of O'Callaghan's country, at the local museum in the town of Garva. He's meeting historian Dr. Paddy McWilliams to look at an unlikely source of information about the local Irish population in George O'Mullen's time, the Ordnance Survey of Ireland.
So, Mark, this is done on a scale of 6 inches to a mile.
Right.
Amazing level of
Amazing
detail. But quite a bare landscape in a way.
Yeah.
Now,
Oh, there's Glac.
There's Glac Townland.
Looks just like it did this morning.
Yes.
Which means?
That's Glac means the hollow or the recess.
Right. Quite non-specific.
Yes.
The British Ordnance Survey project of the 1820s and 30s set out to map Ireland and record Irish place names, including George O'Mullen's family homestead at Ashlammaduff.
And over here we have the townland of Ashlammaduff.
Ashlammaduff, yes, which keeps recurring.
Ashlammaduff. Your stress isn't in the right place. Ashlammaduff.
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 Ashlammaduff. Right. Which means?
Which is Ashlamdu, is bare black hill. But to investigate the origins of place names, John O'Donovan, one of the principal field workers of the Ordnance Survey, traversed, I say, every nook and cranny of the country for a number of years. And what we have here is a letter written by John O'Donovan to the head of the Ordnance Survey, detailing his experiences in this part of the world, 1834.
Yes, I have travelled through the parishes, yes, several Irish names.
Yes.
In search of Aborigines. Wow.
He meant Irish speakers.
Right. I passed through the wildest district I ever beheld in the townlands of Glac. I was at length directed to Mr. Mullen, land steward to Mr. Sampson. So, Mr. Mullen, is that George O'Mullen?
That's George.
Right. He is a very intelligent man.
Naturally.
And has a general idea of the county. I spent the greater part of yesterday with him to get him to define their topographical words. Tour, a talking place, maybe where people gathered to gossip.
Yes.
Evish.
Yes.
Avish.
Avish.
Soft grass, wild mountain pasture.
So your ancestor, through his meeting with O'Donovan, was able to provide what, more than a dozen little snippets of information that John O'Donovan used. So your ancestor made an impression on O'Donovan. He was a land steward. He sort of worked for the other side, you might say, to a certain degree. Yet I don't think he lived at arm's length from the people, because I don't think a person would be able to be so imbued and so aware of their origin and of the living history around them and the traditions and recollections of the county. I think was certainly not at arm's length from the people amongst whom he lived. A decent sort. Without his input, O'Donovan perhaps would have had more difficulty in ascertaining the local townland names, which are still here to this day.
And this one.
Have a stab at that.
Well, I'll go around the houses, because it won't sound at all like it looks, shall it? Sisan?
Sheskin.
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 Quag, or quaw. Quag, a shaking bog.
Yeah, I think that's short for quagmire. Unlike perhaps in England or in Great Britain, where things were written down, history in Ireland was passed down primarily in an oral manner. John O'Donovan's inquiries unearthed a lot of oral history that was about to disappear, and he meandered into some wonderful tales. George O'Mullen told the story to O'Donovan.
Great, so there's more to...
There's more indeed.
What have we got here? Mullen tells the following story of the fate of the O'Kanes. Oh, good.
As well as explaining local names, George O'Mullen was a keeper of the family stories. He told O'Donovan a colourful and elaborate tale of distant ancestors in O'Cahon's country.
He drew his dagger and ran him through! Exclamation mark.
I think the gist of it, Mark, is that the rightful O'Kane heir was killed by a usurper, and he, in turn, met his comeuppance at the hand of the followers of the rightful heir.
That's quite a yarn, isn't it? The fall of the O'Kanes.
The fall of the O'Kanes, indeed. We're amazed that this is the only story that George knew. I can't believe it. And O'Donovan probably heard more, but told this particular one because of the intrigue and the skullduggery involved in it. A modern Shanachie would perhaps tell you more than I could.
What's that?
Shanachie is the Irish word for storyteller.
It appeals to me because it makes it feel like there's storytelling in the blood. I'm really taken by the fact that George O'Mullen was regarded as something of a storyteller, a Shanachie. So I'm now going to try and meet the genuine article and see if he can tell me a bit more about it.
Mark wants to know more family stories of the O'Kanes and the O'Mullens that his great-great-great-grandfather would have passed down.
Hello, Bob.
Mark.
Pleasure to meet you. Very well, thank you.
Welcome to Glenolm.
Thank you.
You'll see a few headstones,
Yeah, familiar names.
which are familiar names.
Mullen. Kane.
Mark's joined Bob Curran at St Joseph's Church in the village of Glenullen. Bob is a folklorist, as well as a storyteller.
People like George O'Mullen would have imbibed the traditions of the area. We're beginning to look at stories, myths, folklore, and bits and pieces of history, all fused together to give the people a sense of belonging and to give them their identity.
And I suppose they get more and more embroidered as generations pass.
Well, you see, these are oral stories, Mark. And in order to remember the stories, you had to have wonderful facts. The more spectacular the story, the better they remembered it. And in this area, you're surrounded by supernatural.
So are there any famous stories that George would have known around the supernatural that actually concern the family, the clan?
Well, Mark, I know you're very interested in vampires.
Tends to be.
Yes. Now, the Irish for vampire is Der Gudul, the Red Drinker. And here is a book which might be of interest to you and has a story in it which is connected to the O'Cahons, which George O'Mullen would undoubtedly have known. It may well have formed one of the strands.
Of Dracula.
Of Dracula.
How brilliant. So you think Stoker would have known then?
Well, in this area, the word Dracula means bad blood.
No.
Yes.
That's too good. Where am I looking?
You're looking at, think about page 64.
The Tale of Aphatach?
Auertach.
Auertach. The legend comes from the townland of Slortavity, near the town of Garva in North Derry, which, though it is only a few miles from the town, is still a fairly isolated spot. It lies in the Glenullen Valley and is cut off on three sides by the beginning of the Sperrins mountain range. In the 5th and 6th centuries, this valley was a patchwork of tiny kingdoms, each ruled by individual kings who were little more than local warlords. So this vampire story concerns an O'Kane.
It does, yeah.
It would have been a story known to my great-great-great-grandfather O'Mullen.
Yeah.
And Slortavity's still there.
You can go and have a look at it.
Before the sun goes down.
I would go there
recommend
pretty
it?
quick. Now, whatever you do, Mark, don't try to lift the stone or the vampire will get out again.
Okay. Those under the harsh rulership of Aotak wished to get rid of him, and because of his dark powers, they were too frightened to attack him themselves. So they hired another chieftain called Cachan, or Cathain, O'Kane, to come and kill him for them, which he did, slaying Aotak and burying him standing up, a befitting burial for an Irish chieftain. The next day, however, Aotak was back, demanding a basin filled with blood from the wrists of his subjects, in order, says the legend, to sustain his vile corpse. Puzzled, Cachan went to a holy man and asked him the reason. The holy man thought for a moment. The evil Aotak is not dead, he replied at length, but he is in a state of suspension due to his dark arts. He has become one of the Neem Marb and cannot therefore be killed, but he can be prevented from rising again. In order to do this, the hermit told him, Cachan must slay Aotak with a sword made of yew wood. He must bury him upside down. He must surround the gravesite with thorns, and he must place a great stone directly above the spot where the vampire lay. The grave is still there. It is said that the thorns that Cachan placed around the site have grown together into a thorn tree that grows above the remnants of the sepulchre. Even today, local people will not approach the field after nightfall. Which, looking at the state of the sun, means that we should probably get out of here. George O'Mullen was a brilliant storyteller, so I don't want to over-romanticize it, but it sort of feels like maybe that's where I get it from. Somehow there's a little slant towards all that which comes from being of this stock way, way, way back. I'd like to think so. But that might be just me romanticizing. I don't know. It might be just because I spent too much time watching horror films as a child. But it's, it feels right. It feels like it's coming from somewhere, and I rather like that. And all that brilliant stuff, you can feel it. You know, it still feels possible on a dark night like this, in the middle of Northern Ireland. Clearly we know from his storytelling that George was very aware and very proud of his roots, but his story is very up and down, isn't it?
George O'Mullen had a job as a land steward for the British landlords, the Company of Fishmongers. But like his neighbours, he was also a tenant farmer, renting poor land at Glack, as well as the homestead, Ashlammaduff. Mark wants to know what became of George and his family, and get to the bottom of how his son, Jeremiah, came to own such a vast amount of land.
I'm off now to Drumcovit House, which is a Georgian house, originally owned by the Company of Fishmongers, of whom we've heard a lot, to meet a historian called Olwyn Purdue.
Olwyn has been searching the livery company's records for more information about George. The first from 1836.
You might like to have a look at this document from the Fishmongers Company.
We received a petition of George O'Mullen Glack stating that in consequence of the extreme severity of the last winter, he had lost 15 head of black cattle and 4 horses, and soliciting a loan of £100 at 5% to enable him to continue his improvements and to bring more land into cultivation, which sum he would repay at the end of 5 years or by yearly instalments as the court may please to direct.
So he's taking out quite a significant loan here, isn't he? And promising to repay it. So it's a big, big investment.
As well as the grazing, what would they have been? It would have been crops.
He would have been trying to grow potatoes, I would have imagined, as well. I mean, ultimately at this stage, potatoes for the bulk of the population were the staple diet.
When was the famine?
Famine
It started in 1845.
So, I mean, he didn't know this, but it's getting very close to the big crash, isn't it?
George O'Mullen was heavily in debt when the famine hit. For 7 years after a blight wiped out the potato crop in 1845, the Great Famine devastated Ireland. Nearly 1 million people died from starvation and disease, contributing to a mass exodus from the island.
The kind of land that George was trying to cultivate, the famine hit very hard indeed and continued really until 1850. 1851. There was an agricultural depression at the time as well, so things were really, really hard across the board. So out of 5 sons of George, 4 of them migrated to New York, and we think 2 to Australia, and leaving Jeremiah, the 5th son, here at home with his father.
That's interesting. I wonder why he chose to stay behind.
You do suspect that this was something that was very important to George, to have one son with him, presumably helping him out. So I think for Jeremiah to stay, to carry on that family presence here was very important. So you might want to now look at this next document, 1852.
Deputation much regretted to find that the company's old tenant, George O'Mullen, had been dispossessed of his holding in Glack. Hard times. After putting all that effort and all that money in, he's basically just chucked out in his ear. And would that be basically because he would have been increasingly behind with his payments, and then it never really, and then the famine hit and it was all blown?
Absolutely.
And also it says here, his age being greatly against his so doing, so he was clearly too old to make a fresh start. There is a mystery here because we know Jeremiah, who stayed behind, we now know, in the 1880s, he is listed as having quite a lot of land.
Yeah.
So his fortunes certainly improved, if not his father's. Do we know anything about that?
This affidavit might actually start to give you some clues as to what happened with Jeremiah. This is a bit later.
So this is 1876. So this is an affidavit that Jeremiah O'Mullen, the only other son of the said George O'Mullen and Bridget, his wife, and the brother of the said Bernard O'Mullen, and that since his father's death about 13 years ago, he has always resided in and now resides in Ashlimaduff, aforesaid, in said county.
Mark's great-great-great-grandfather, George O'Mullen, died at Ashlimaduff around 1861. Jeremiah, the only son remaining in Ireland, stayed on at the homestead, still just a tenant.
We have to ask, why was this affidavit needed?
This letter might help shed some light on the mystery.
It's August 24th, 1875.
This is a letter.
Mr. Jeremiah Mullen. Dear Sir, a letter from Messrs. Fitzharding and Son of New South Wales, solicitors for the executors of your brother Bernard O'Mullen. Your brother died with a considerable sum estimated at £20,000, and that by his will he bequeathed the principal part of it to his brothers George Vaughan, Neil Arthur, yourself and John in equal shares. The object of the communication is to obtain the address of yourself and brothers in this country. Oh my God, so it's an inheritance.
That would have been £5,000 then, which would be about £400,000 today.
It's a fortune.
It is a fortune. It's a lot of money.
So Bernard has done very well in Australia. Do we know what he was doing?
He was a grazier.
Like his dad.
Like his dad.
Wow. Gosh, that's wonderful. So out of this adversity, something has come. Well, we know from the Public Records Office, Jeremiah invested a lot of it in land himself because he has hundreds of acres.
So finally,
An indenture of conveyance, 1891, made between the Corporation of Master and Wardens and Brethren and Sisters of the Guild of Fraternity of Corpus Christi of Skinners of London and Jeremiah O'Mullen of Ashlimaduff, Garver in County Londonderry, farmer, thereinafter called the purchaser of the third part, and that is Ashlimaduff. So he bought it.
He's bought it.
Wow, wow. Rather than investing in rich, arable land somewhere else in the country, he's basically bought home.
He has.
Yeah.
It shows the deep commitment he had to home. This was a really important thing for him to do. To be able to actually own the land was really something.
And own their clan land, really. I mean, going back to the O'Cachans and everything, this is their territory. You can imagine him wishing that his father had lived to see it, because it's one of those things, isn't it? If my dad could see me now,
He'd be so proud.
He'd be so proud. Yeah. Is it still mine?
Well, actually, it is still owned by a member of your family, a lady called Betty Ann McNichol, who lives just down the road in Dungiven. And the property itself isn't far away.
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic.
So it's still in the family.
This whole situation is like a Western, I think. The grazing of the cattle, the pushing out of the indigenous people onto the poor land. It's really interesting. And this is a bit like a Native American getting a little bit of Manhattan back. I'm going to write a Western. That's what I'm going to do. Film it here. It's a brilliant story. The land is them, they are the land. That's the tagline of the film, by the way.
Mark's in the town of Dungiven to pick up his distant cousin, Betty Ann McNichol. Betty Ann is Jeremiah Mullen's great-granddaughter, one generation closer to him than Mark.
Pleasure to meet you, Mark. Are you coming in, maybe?
Yes, sure. As long as there's a cup of tea. This is him.
Oh, my goodness.
In the 1850s.
My Uncle Jerry's very like him.
We always talk about the O'Kane nose. My Uncle Pat has this. My mum had this.
Yes.
But I think it's no Mullen nose now.
And believe it or not, my sons have it.
I'm proud of it now. I used to hate it.
I'll show you this photograph of my grandfather. Now, it'd be a son of Jeremiah. This was in a boat coming home from America, the SS America. And that's my grandfather, James Mullen, a son of Jeremiah and a brother of great-aunt Margaret.
Great-grandmother.
Great-grandmother. And that's myself. That's my brother and my mother. And
so you were born in America?
I was born in Long Island, New York.
Wow. You could run for president.
I still have my American passport, though. And I've also here photographs of your two aunts, Winifred and Rose. Your great-aunts, I should say. Well, your mother was
My
Winifred.
mother was Winifred, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
Winifred
that she was
Rose.
named
Winifred
after.
Rose.
Oh, for goodness sake, named after the two of them. Not lovely. When did your mother die?
2003.
2003.
You have a look at my mum as well.
Is that
You do,
right?
yeah.
Betty Ann grew up at Ashlimaduff from her early teens. She now rents the land to cousins, Mullens, who still farm it.
So this is it then?
This is the homestead.
The old homestead.
That's right.
Ashlimaduff.
Ashlimaduff. Happy memories.
Did you remember what you thought when you first saw it after coming from America?
Not really. I just remember getting out of the car, up at the door, and all the people being there, and at a big, like a Keeley house, and plenty of laughing and singing and dancing.
A welcoming committee, wasn't it?
A welcoming committee.
Yeah.
All the neighbours and cousins had all arrived to meet us.
Right. Well, there it is.
It was home to me. We had our rosary every night down on the cement floor, and that was the way it was.
It's very striking that I think that there's so much travel, lots of people in the family going to Australia and America, but there's the sense of wanting to come home.
Oh, yes.
Is incredibly strong, isn't it?
Aye. And there's a pull. There's always the pull to your homeland, you know. There's something about this here. It was because your grandfathers and your great-grandfathers, that's where your heart lies. just, you know.
And it's still in the family, you've kept it going.
It's still kept it going.
Yeah.
Please God, we will as long as we can, whatever.
Let's have a
Just
look.
only time will tell. Now, in we go.
Step. Watch your step.
Uh-huh. Here we are. Well, when I lived here, that's the fireplace. There was a big fire burning there with our kitchen table there.
Yeah.
That was all those years ago.
It's a shame to see it like this, isn't it?
Aye. Like it's over 50 years, you know, since anybody lived here. Here we are.
Extraordinary. It is.
Mm-hmm.
Several generations in here. I'm going to see if I can get around the side.
Okay, Mark.
Like his father, George, before him, Jeremiah O'Malley died here at Ashlimaduff in 1908. He was 75.
Wonderful to find something as tangible as this. As a homestead. I just really can't get over how bleak it is. It's such a tough country. The choice to live here in such a landscape is moving, really. I like him for doing it. I should really take a little bit back. Build something around it. Living with the legends and history of the O'Mullins and the O'Kanes, and having once been kings in ancient times, it's a very strong sense of ownership and dispossession, and then a rightful restoration. To have been bought by Jeremiah, almost certainly lived in by George O'Mullen, sort of brings the whole story full circle. I'm very heartened to know it's still in the O'Mullen family. And by dint of that, somehow the O'Kanes too, as we're all intertwined. I have loved every minute of this. I don't want to stop. I'm definitely coming back at the head of an army to reclaim my rightful kingdom.
Good luck, Mark. Now, Philip Larkin's life is seen through his own photography, a fascinating journey on BBC4 at